The lobby doors hissed open and the night changed temperature. I knew the two men in cheap suits were trouble before they cleared the threshold. Debt collectors always move like they were already bored. What I didn't expect was the man behind them. He didn't belong to the same weather. He stepped in last, coat unbuttoned, not hurrying. "Lena Moretti," one of the suits said, flashing paperwork I didn't touch. "You're to come with us." My manager suddenly discovered the fine art of being elsewhere. The night audit hummed on my screen. The clock read 12:03 a.m. My hands stayed flat on the marble, hotel training, because flat hands were how you kept a situation from becoming a scene. "I'm on shift," I said. "You can wait or you can leave." "That's not how this works," the bored one said, reaching. The tall man in the coat spoke for the first time. "Hands down," he said without raising his voice. They dropped, like he'd pressed a button. Then he looked at me, not at my name tag, at me. His eyes were iron blue and steady. "Miss Moretti, may I speak with you, over here?" He tilted his head toward the seating nook by the windows. "Your choice." My pulse hopped. Choice. What a sweet lie. I nodded anyway and rounded the desk, keeping a chair between me and everyone with a penalty clause. We stood with the rain behind us, glass flooded with streetlight. He kept a respectful distance. The collectors hovered at the edge of the carpet, pretend patient. "Adrian Valenti," he said. The last name landed like a gavel. "I'm here to verify transfer of guardianship services under a debt instrument signed by your family when you were a minor." His gaze didn't flinch. "You were not consulted. I'm aware." Heat rose in my throat. "And yet you're here." "I am," he said. "To make sure it isn't ugly." One of the suits snorted. Adrian didn't look at him. He lowered his voice instead, a shade softer. "You will not be touched. We will leave through the front door at your walking pace. If you have a bag, you'll bring it. If you need 5 minutes to call a friend, you'll take them. I'll wait right there." He indicated the lobby clock with a flick of 2 fingers. "But the paper exists," I breathed through my nose. My father's signature, probably. Some kitchen table deal when I was 13, and he thought family meant leverage instead of love. "How long?" 3 months, Adrian said. "Standard intermediary term. You'll reside under my roof, assist with select public engagements, and when the contract expires, you walk away clear. No balance carried forward." "Intermediary," I repeated, tasting the word. It was prettier than hostage, I'd give them that. "You'll have your own quarters, your own key, legal counsel if you want it." His jaw tightened, barely. "And if any man in my employ speaks to you the way he just did—" He turned his head a fraction toward the bored collector who had the grace to look at the floor. "You will tell me, immediately." There it was, the control and the care, wrapped together so tight I couldn't tell where one ended. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But I was also doing the math. 3 months to clear a debt I didn't sign, or years looking over my shoulder waiting for the next crew to show up at another lobby, another job, another life I'd have to abandon. "I need 10 minutes, I said. "Take 15. Adrian reached into his coat and set something on the chair between us. A signet ring, gold and old. The kind of thing that opened doors or closed them. "I'll be at the car. If you run, Miss Moretti, I will find you. And next time, I won't be the one they send." He walked away before I could answer, the collectors trailing him like shadows. The doors hissed shut. The lobby returned to its regular temperature, but I stayed cold. I stared at the ring. It sat there like a promise and a threat. The Valenti crest worn smooth by generations of hands that never had to ask permission. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I could already feel its weight. I took 12 minutes, enough to text my roommate, family thing, gone a few days, and grab my backpack from the break room. I didn't explain. Explaining made it real, and I needed it to stay a problem I could solve if I just stayed sharp, stayed calm, stayed useful. The rain had thickened by the time I pushed through the doors. Adrian stood beside a black town car, hands in his pockets, coat darkening at the shoulders. He didn't check his watch, didn't tap his foot. He just waited, still as stone, until I stopped 3 feet away. "You came back," he said, and I couldn't read his face. Surprise? Relief? It didn't matter. "You're holding the leash," I said. Didn't seem like I had a choice. Something flickered in his expression, regret, maybe, or exhaustion, but it passed. He opened the rear door himself. No driver stepping forward to do it for him. You'll sit behind the passenger seat. Door stays unlocked. If you want it cracked for air, say so. I stopped. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm asking you to get in a car with a man you don't know, at midnight, under duress. His voice dropped, rough at the edges. And because I need you to believe that you will arrive intact. The rain drummed on the car roof. Streetlight caught the hard line of his jaw, the shadows under his eyes. He looked like a man who'd spent a long time making sure other people's fear didn't touch him, and it had cost him something. I got in. He closed the door with a soft, final click. The interior smelled like leather and rain. Adrian slid into the seat kitty corner from me, behind the driver, not beside me, and pulled the door shut. The partition was down. The driver, older, gray-haired, didn't turn around, but I saw his eyes in the rearview mirror. Flat, professional, used to transporting cargo that breathed. Lena, Adrian said, and the sound of my first name in his mouth made me look at him. If at any point you feel unsafe, you say the word red. Once, the car stops, you get out, and I will personally ensure you reach a place of your choosing. No penalties, no pursuit. I blinked. You're giving me a safe word for a car ride? I'm giving you a safe word for the next 3 months. He leaned back, one arm draped over the seat, fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm. Use it poorly, and we renegotiate. Use it honestly, and I'll honor it. That's the deal. That wasn't in the contract, I said. The contract, Adrian said softly, is a piece of paper signed by men who aren't in this car. You and I are, so we make our own terms. The driver pulled into traffic, smooth and silent. The city slid past the window, neon, glass, the late-night ballet of delivery trucks and cabs. I should have been watching for landmarks, tracking the route, planning an exit. Instead, I watched Adrian Valente in the fractured glow of passing headlights, trying to figure out if he was a decent man doing a bad thing or a bad man who'd learned to fake decency. Why intermediary? I asked. What does that even mean? He considered me for a long moment, like he was deciding how much truth I could handle. It means you'll stand beside me at events where reputation is currency. Charity galas, business dinners, the kind of rooms where everyone's watching to see who flinches first. He paused. You'll smile, you'll stay close, and you'll make me look like a man who keeps his house in order. A prop, I said flatly. A partner, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? I heard the bite in my voice and didn't soften it. Because from where I'm sitting, you bought 3 months of my life to play dress up for your reputation. His jaw tightened. For a second I thought I'd pushed too far, that the careful civility would crack, and I'd see what was underneath. But he just exhaled, slow and controlled, and turned his gaze to the window. You're not wrong, he said finally, but you're not entirely right either. The silence that followed felt like a test. I watched the rain streak the glass, the way the drops raced each other toward some invisible finish line. My hands were folded in my lap, concierge still, but my heart was a snare drum. There's a retainer, Adrian said, breaking the quiet. 5,000 deposited tonight. Another 5 at the halfway mark. The balance when the contract completes. He pulled a business card from his coat, cream stock, raised lettering, and held it out. That's my attorney. Call him tomorrow. He'll explain your options. I took the card. Our fingers didn't touch, but it felt close. Too close. Options, I repeated. Like what? Like exit clauses, breach terms. What happens if I violate the parameters? His mouth curved, bitter and brief. Contrary to popular belief, Miss Moretti, I prefer informed consent to coercion, even when the situation is less than ideal. I turned the card over. The firm's name was embossed in gold, the kind of place that charged 4 figures just to answer the phone. And if I don't call? Then you're trusting me at my word. His eyes found mine in the dim. Which would be unwise. But you'd prefer it, I guessed. He didn't answer, which was an answer. The car slowed, turning onto a quieter street where the brownstones stood shoulder to shoulder, their windows glowing warm against the wet dark. Old money. The kind of neighborhood where even the trees looked expensive. The driver pulled to the curb in front of a narrow townhouse, 4 stories of red brick and wrought iron, the kind of place that had seen a century of secrets and kept them all. Adrian reached for the door handle, then stopped. "Before we go in," he said, voice low, "you should know, my family will ask questions. Cousins mostly, Aunt Rosa. They'll want to know who you are and why you're here, and they will not be kind about it." He looked at me, steady and serious. "You don't owe them answers. You don't owe them anything. If they push, you defer to me. Understood?" "Defer," I said slowly, like a good little intermediary. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, like someone under my protection. The word landed heavy, protection, as if I were a thing that needed guarding, an asset that required securing. But there was something else in his face too, something that looked almost like apology. "Understood," I said, because what else was there to say? He nodded once and got out. I reached for my own handle, but he was already there, opening my door, offering a hand I didn't take. I stepped out onto the wet pavement, the rain cool on my face, and looked up at the townhouse. 4 stories, iron-railed balconies, windows like watching eyes. It should have felt like a prison. Instead, it felt like the kind of place where deals were made and rules bent, where power moved through rooms like smoke. Adrian stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him against the rain-chill air. He didn't rush me, didn't crowd me, just waited, hands loose at his sides, while I stared at the door that would swallow the next 3 months of my life. "One more thing," he said quietly, and I turned to look at him. The streetlight caught the edge of his profile, sharp, tired, handsome in the way that expensive things were handsome. Intentional. He reached out, not toward me, but toward my sleeve, where a loose red thread had snagged on the rough edge of my backpack strap. His fingers were careful, precise. He pinched the thread, tugged it free, and held it up between us, a single bright filament against the dark. "You're unraveling," he said, almost gentle. "I'm fine," I shot back, but my voice cracked on the word. He looked at me for a long moment, then slipped the thread into his coat pocket. "We'll see," he said, and turned toward the door. I followed him into the house, and the night closed behind us like a fist. The townhouse smelled like old wood and older secrets. Adrian moved through the entry hall with the ease of someone who'd walked these floors 1,000 times. Coat shrugged off and draped over a carved banister, shoes left by the door in a neat, habitual line. I stood on the marble tile, dripping, unsure if I was supposed to follow or wait for permission. He glanced back. "You can breathe, Miss Moretti. The house won't bite." "Will you?" I asked before I could stop myself. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, not without warning. He gestured toward the stairs. "Come, I'll show you where you'll stay." I followed him up, my wet sneakers squeaking against the hardwood. The walls were lined with portraits, men in dark suits, women in pearls, all of them watching with the same iron blue eyes Adrian carried. Valenti eyes, the kind that tracked you even when you weren't moving. 2nd floor, 3rd. He didn't stop until we reached the 4th, where the hallway narrowed and the ceilings sloped. It felt less grand up here, more lived in. A pair of doors faced each other across a Persian runner worn soft in the center. Adrian pushed open the door on the right. "Yours," he said simply, and stepped aside. The room was small but not cramped. Sloped ceiling, a dormer window overlooking the street, a bed with a brass frame and a quilt that looked handmade, a desk, a chair, a closet with the door half open, showing empty hangers waiting. It was plain and clean and unexpectedly kind, the sort of space someone had thought about before I arrived. "Bathrooms shared," Adrian said, nodding toward a door at the end of the hall. "My room is across from yours. If you need anything, knock. I'm a light sleeper." I set my backpack on the bed and turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, one hand braced on the frame, close enough that I could see the rain still caught in his dark hair, the way his shirt clung to his shoulders, close, but not crowding, like he was giving me room to decide where the boundaries were. "Why the top floor?" I asked. "Privacy," he said. "The family doesn't come up here, neither does staff, unless I call for them. It's neutral ground." "Nothing about this is neutral." "No," he agreed quietly, "but it's the best I can do." The silence stretched. I should have thanked him for the room, for the quiet, for not putting me in some basement cell with a cot and a bucket. but gratitude felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to give him that yet. There are rules, Adrian said, shifting his weight. Not many, but they matter. 1. When we're in public, you stay within arm's reach. 2. If someone asks who you are, you say associate and nothing more. 3. If my cousin Marco speaks to you, you smile and walk away. He's a bastard and I don't trust him. Associate, I repeated, not intermediary. Intermediary is a contract term. Associate is a cover. His gaze sharpened. The fewer people who know the truth, the safer you are. Reputation is a weapon in my world, Miss Moretti. I'd prefer not to aim it at you. And if I break the rules, then we'll have a conversation. He said it lightly, but there was steel underneath. I don't punish mistakes. I correct them. But if you put yourself, or me, at risk, there will be consequences. Clear? Crystal, I said, and meant it. He nodded, satisfied, and straightened. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll go over the events calendar and what to expect. 7 a.m. sharp. I'll make coffee. He turned to leave, and I should have let him go. Should have closed the door and tried to make sense of the surreal shape my life had taken in the span of 2 hours. But my mouth moved before my brain caught up. Mr. Valenti, he stopped. Half turned in the hallway. Yes? Why me? The question came out smaller than I wanted. You could have sent anyone to enforce that contract. Why show up yourself? For a moment, he didn't answer. His jaw worked like he was choosing words carefully, weighing what I could handle against what I deserved to know. Because, he said finally, I remember what it's like to have your life signed away by people who should have protected you. And because, he paused, eyes distant, because I wanted to make sure the first face you saw wasn't someone who'd enjoy it. He left before I could respond, his door clicking shut across the hall. I stood there, staring at the empty space where he'd been, my chest tight with something I didn't have a name for. I closed my door, locked it, then unlocked it, because locked felt too much like trapped. I sat on the bed and pulled out my phone, but there was no one to call, no message I could send that wouldn't sound insane. Hey, got collected by the mob tonight. Don't wait up. The rain drummed against the window. The house settled around me, old beams creaking in their joints. And somewhere across the hall, Adrian Valenti wasn't sleeping either. I could feel it, the weight of him, the watchfulness, like he was standing guard even though the danger was already inside. I lay back on the quilt and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I'd figure out how to survive this. Tonight, I just had to make it till morning. I woke to the smell of coffee and the gray light of a city dawn. For a disorienting moment, I didn't know where I was. The sloped ceiling rang, the street sounds muffled and distant. Then it came back in a rush, the lobby, the car, the red thread disappearing into Adrian's pocket, like a piece of me he'd decided to keep. I dragged myself out of bed and into yesterday's clothes, splashed water on my face in the shared bathroom, and followed the coffee smell downstairs. The house looked different in daylight, less menacing, more worn. The portraits on the walls were just paint and canvas. The shadows were just shadows. The kitchen was at the back of the first floor, all white tile and copper pots. A long table scarred with use. Adrian stood at the counter in a t-shirt and dark slacks, hair damp from a shower, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. He looked up when I came in, and for a second, something unguarded crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, that I'd actually come down. Morning, he said, and slid 1 mug toward me. Milk's in the fridge. Sugar's there. Black's fine. I took the mug and wrapped my hands around it, grateful for the heat. You said 7 sharp. It's 6:47. You're early. He leaned back against the counter, his own mug cradled loose in one hand. Nervous? Prepared, I corrected, and sipped. The coffee was good, strong, slightly bitter, the kind that woke you up and kept you sharp. You make this yourself? Aunt Rosa taught me. She said a man who can't make decent coffee can't be trusted. His mouth twitched. She had opinions. Had? Has, he corrected. Very much present tense. You'll meet her eventually. She'll want to know everything about you, and she'll see through any lie you try. Fair warning, I set the mug down. So what do I tell her? The truth, Adrian said. That you're here because of a debt you didn't sign, and I'm trying to make it bearable. She'll respect that more than a cover story. Will she respect you for it? His smile was brief and bleak. Rosa hasn't respected me since I was 12. I'm not holding my breath for a reversal. There was a story there, something old and unhealed. But before I could ask, he pushed off the counter and crossed to the table. He moved a chair, angling it just so, then stepped back and looked at me. "Come here," he said. I hesitated, then set my mug down and walked over. He gestured to the chair. "Sit." I sat. He circled behind me, not touching, just positioning himself at my back. I felt my shoulders tense, every instinct screaming threat, but I forced myself still. "You're going to be in a lot of crowded rooms in the next 3 months," Adrian said quietly, his voice close to my ear, but not invasive. "Dinners, galas, meetings where everyone wants something and no one says it directly. You need to know how to hold space without looking afraid." "I'm a concierge," I said. "I already know how to hold space." "In a lobby, yes, where you have a desk and a phone and an exit." His hand appeared in my peripheral vision, not touching me, just hovering near my shoulder. "In my world, the desk is gone, the exit is watched, and every move you make is a signal." He moved the chair again, closer to the table this time, his hands on the backrest, bracketing me without trapping me. I could feel the heat of him, the controlled strength in the way he adjusted the angle with precision. "This," he said, "is proximity management. You stay close enough to signal allegiance, but far enough to retain autonomy. You angle your body to show engagement without submission. He paused, stepped back. "Here, try it." I stood. He sat in the chair, legs spread, posture easy but alert. "Pretend we're at a gala. Someone's asking me a question I don't want to answer. You're my associate. Show me how you'd position yourself." I stared at him, this man who'd bought 3 months of my life, and was now asking me to play act intimacy at 6 in the morning. It should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt like a test. I stepped closer, not beside him, but slightly behind and to the left, one hand coming to rest on the back of his chair. Close enough to be present, far enough to leave. "Better," Adrian said, and I could hear the approval in his voice. "But your hand is too light. You're hovering. Commit to the touch or don't touch at all." I pressed my palm flat against the chair back, felt the solid wood under my skin. "Good." He looked up at me, and the angle put his face too close, his eyes too direct. "Now, someone insults me, subtly. A comment about my father, maybe, or a question about where the family money comes from. What do you do?" I swallowed. "I defer to you." "Wrong." His gaze didn't waver. "You don't defer. You deflect. You smile and say something benign. Mr. Valenti prefers to let his work speak for itself. Or, I'm sure you understand discretion. You give me 3 seconds to decide if I want to engage. That's the job." "Deflect," I repeated, "not defend. Defending makes it a fight. Deflecting makes it noise." He stood, slow and deliberate, and suddenly we were too close. The space between us reduced to inches. "The goal is to make me look unshakable, unbothered, like nothing they say can land." "And what if something does land?" I asked. His expression shuddered. "Then you get me out of the room before anyone sees it." We stood there, the kitchen bright and ordinary around us, and I realized this wasn't just coaching. This was survival. His survival, maybe, as much as mine. "Here," Adrian said, and held out his hand. Palm up, waiting, I looked at it, at him. "Trust exercise," he said. "You don't have to take it, but if we're going to do this, if we're going to sell it, you need to be able to touch me without flinching, and I need to know you won't pull away when it counts." My heart kicked. This was it, the line between transaction and something else. Something that felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with debt or contracts. I put my hand in his. His fingers closed, warm and sure, and he didn't pull me closer. Just held on, steady, his thumb brushing once across my knuckles. The touch was careful, almost reverent, like he was handling something fragile. "Good," he said softly. "Now let go." I pulled my hand back, and the absence of his touch felt like cold air rushing in. "That's the balance," Adrian said, stepping away to give me space. "Close enough to matter, distant enough to think. We'll practice until it's second nature." "When's the first event?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "Thursday. Riva Club. It's a mediation dinner, Neutral territory, low stakes, but everyone will be watching. He picked up his coffee, drained it. We have 3 days to make sure you're ready. And if I'm not, then we'll fake it. He set the mug in the sink, his back to me. I'm very good at faking it. There was something bleak in the way he said it, like he'd spent a lifetime pretending to be unbreakable, and the cracks were starting to show. The days folded into a rhythm I didn't expect. Dawn coffee, proximity drills, breaks where Adrian disappeared into his study, and I was left to explore the house or stare at my phone or try to remember what my life had looked like 72 hours ago. He was patient, exacting. He taught me how to read a room, who held power, who wanted it, who was dangerous, and who was just noise. He taught me how to exit a conversation without offense, how to signal distress with a single glance, how to stand so that my body said allied but not owned. And in the quiet moments between drills, I started to see past the iron blue eyes and the controlled voice. I saw the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was tired, the way he always poured my coffee first, the way he asked every single time, "Here," before stepping into my space. On the third night, after another round of mock introductions and practice smiles, I found him in the kitchen again. Late? The house was dark except for the pendant light over the table, and he sat with a mug of something that wasn't coffee, staring at nothing. "Can't sleep?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up, startled, like he'd forgotten I was in the house. "Old habit," he said. "I don't sleep much." I crossed to the counter, poured myself water from the tap, and leaned against the sink. "Why not?" "Because sleep is when you stop watching," he said simply. "And in my family, that's when things go wrong." I should have left it alone, should have taken my water and gone back upstairs, but instead I heard myself say, "What happened when you were 12? Adrian went very still. For a long moment I thought he wouldn't answer, that I'd pushed into territory that was off limits. Then he exhaled, slow and controlled, and set his mug down. "My father made a deal," he said quietly. "A binding contract with another family. I was the collateral." His gaze stayed on the table, on his hands. "I didn't know until the men came to collect. I fought. My father let them take me anyway." My chest tightened. "How long?" 6 months. His voice was flat, factual, like he was reciting someone else's story. I learned how to stay quiet, how to be useful, how to make myself indispensable so they'd have a reason to keep me intact. He looked up finally, and his eyes were hollow. When the term ended, my father picked me up like nothing had happened. Didn't apologize, didn't explain, just said, "You're a Valenti. Act like it." I set my water down, crossed the kitchen, stopped at the edge of the table where the light carved shadows under his jaw. "Is that why you came for me yourself?" I asked. "Because you knew what it felt like?" "Yes." The word was barely a breath. "I couldn't stop the contract, but I could make sure the enforcement didn't break you." Something in my chest cracked open. This man, this careful, controlled man who moved through the world like he was made of iron, had been a scared 12-year-old once, had been collateral, had survived by learning to be indispensable. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be." Adrian stood, and we were close again. The table between us the only thing keeping the moment from folding into something I wasn't ready for. "I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you so you understand. I know what you're risking, and I won't waste it." "Risking?" I echoed. "Your trust," he said. "Every time you take my hand, every time you step into my space, every time you choose to stay instead of run." His gaze held mine, unflinching. "That's not nothing, Lena. I won't pretend it is." My name, again. The sound of it in his voice made something in my chest pull tight. "Mr. Valenti." "Adrian," he interrupted softly. "When it's just us, it's Adrian." I swallowed. "Adrian." The air between us changed, thickened. He was still across the table, still not touching me, but I could feel the pull of him like gravity, steady, inevitable, dangerous in its certainty. "We should get some sleep," I said, but I didn't move. "We should," Adrian agreed, and didn't move either. The light hummed. The house creaked. And for a handful of seconds that felt like hours, we stood there in the quiet dark, close enough to matter, distant enough to think. Then his phone buzzed on the table, sharp, intrusive, and the spell broke. Adrian glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. 7 a.m. briefing, he said, voice back to business. Riva Club details. We need to go over the guest list. Right, I said, stepping back. 7 a.m. Lena, I stopped in the doorway, looked back. Thank you, he said, for listening. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. When I reached my room, I leaned against the door and pressed my palm flat to the wood, the same way I'd pressed it to his chair, committing to the touch. Across the hall, Adrian's light stayed on for a long time. Thursday arrived with the weight of a held breath. I woke to find a garment bag hanging on my door, black silk, simple and expensive, the kind of dress that knew exactly what it was worth. No note, just the dress and a pair of shoes that fit perfectly, which meant Adrian had been paying attention to details I didn't think anyone noticed. I showered, dressed, stood in front of the bathroom mirror and tried to recognize the woman looking back. The concierge was gone. In her place was someone who looked like she belonged in Adrian's world. Sleek, contained, expensive. The dress moved like water. The shoes made me 3 inches taller and twice as uncertain. When I came downstairs, Adrian was waiting in the entry hall, and the sight of him stopped me on the landing. Dark suit, no tie, white shirt open at the collar, hair pushed back, still slightly damp. He looked like money in control, and something else I couldn't name. Something that made my pulse skip before my brain caught up. He was checking his watch, his profile sharp in the afternoon light, and then he looked up. His expression didn't change exactly, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of heat, quick and banked, before the careful mask slid back into place. You look, he stopped, recalibrated. Professional. You mean expensive, I said, descending the last few stairs, like a prop, like someone who belongs. He closed the distance between us, slow and deliberate, and I fought the urge to back up. May I? May you what? He gestured vaguely toward my shoulder, and I nodded, unsure what I was agreeing to. His hand came up, not touching, just hovering near the strap of my dress. And then his fingers brushed my collarbone, adjusting the fabric a fraction of an inch. The touch lasted 2 seconds. It burned for 10. There, Adrian said, stepping back. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Perfect. I don't feel perfect, I admitted. I feel like I'm about to walk into a shark tank wearing chum. Close, he said. But the sharks wear Patek Philippe and smile while they bite. He held out his hand. Palm up, the same way he had in the kitchen 3 days ago. We'll go over the essentials in the car. For now, trust exercise. I looked at his hand, at him. The memory of our last touch sat between us, electric and unspoken. Hands after yes, I said quietly, remembering his rule. His gaze sharpened. Yes, he said, always after yes. So, may I? I put my hand in his. His fingers closed, warm and certain, and this time he pulled me a half step closer. Not invasive, just present. At the Riva Club, Adrian said, voice low and even. You'll stay within arm's reach, not behind me, beside me. If someone tries to separate us, you smile and say you promised me the next conversation. If Marco shows up, you find Aunt Rosa and stay with her until I extract you. Clear? Crystal. My voice came out steadier than I felt. What if someone asks who I am? Associate and strategic consultant. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist, just once, a tiny point of contact that sent heat racing up my arm. If they push, you deflect. Mr. Valenti's work speaks for itself. Remember? I remember. Good. He released my hand but didn't step back. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. One more thing. He opened it. Inside was a bracelet, delicate gold chain, a single charm shaped like a compass rose. Simple, understated. The kind of thing that whispered old money instead of shouting it. This was my mother's, Adrian said quietly. It's not a gift. It's camouflage. Everyone at the Riva Club will be watching to see how I treat you. If you're wearing something that matters to me, they'll assume you matter to me. It buys us room to maneuver. And after tonight, you give it back. He lifted the bracelet from the box, his movements careful and precise. Unless you'd rather not wear it. Your call, Lena. Always your call. The use of my first name made something in my chest twist. I held out my wrist, and he fastened the clasp with steady fingers, the metal cool against my skin. There, he said. And this time, when he stepped back, I felt the absence like a draft. Now you look like someone I'd go to war for. Is that what tonight is? I asked. A war? His smile was sharp and humorless. Every night is a war. We just dress better for some of them. The Riva Club sat on the top floor of a glass tower in the financial district. All white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city into a glittering backdrop. Adrian's driver, the same gray-haired man from the first night, dropped us at a private entrance, and Adrian placed a hand at the small of my back as we stepped out. The touch was light, impersonal, but it anchored me. Ready? He asked. No, I said honestly. Good, neither am I. He leaned in, just a fraction, his voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. But we're excellent at faking it, remember? I nodded, and we walked into the lion's den. The elevator ride was silent. Adrian stood beside me, hands in his pockets, gaze on the climbing numbers, but I could feel the tension radiating off him, controlled, leashed, dangerous. When the doors opened, he offered his arm, and I took it without hesitation. The moment we stepped into the club, the temperature changed. Heads turned. Conversations paused and restarted. Quieter and sharper. A woman in emerald silk whispered to her companion behind a champagne flute. A man in a navy suit tracked us across the room with eyes that calculated and dismissed in the same breath. Smile, Adrian murmured, guiding me toward a cluster of leather chairs near the windows. Not too much, just enough to look bored by the attention. I smiled. He nodded, satisfied, and stopped to greet an older man with silver hair and a handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long. Adrian, the man said, all warmth and teeth. Heard you were bringing a guest. Didn't realize you were keeping secrets. I don't keep secrets, Richard, Adrian said smoothly. I just choose my audience carefully. He glanced at me, and his hand found the small of my back again. This is Lena Moretti, strategic consultant. She's helping me streamline some community outreach. Community outreach, Richard repeated, his gaze sliding over me like I was a balance sheet he was auditing. How modern of you. How necessary, I corrected, keeping my voice light and professional. Mr. Valenti's work benefits from diverse perspectives. I'm grateful to contribute. Richard's eyebrows lifted, just slightly, and Adrian's hand pressed a fraction more firmly against my back. Approval, I realized. I'd passed some invisible test. Well, Richard said, still smiling his shark smile. Good luck with that. Adrian's work has a way of consuming people. Then it's fortunate, I said, holding his gaze, that I'm very good at managing my time. Adrian made a soft sound that might have been a laugh, quickly covered. Richard's smile thinned, and he excused himself with a nod that was more dismissal than courtesy. The moment he was out of earshot, Adrian leaned in. That, he said quietly, was perfect. I thought I was supposed to deflect, not engage. You deflected by engaging. His breath was warm against my temple, close enough that anyone watching would assume intimacy. He wanted to rattle you. You handed him charm and competence instead. Well done. The praise shouldn't have mattered, but it settled warm in my chest anyway, and I had to remind myself that this was a performance, that the hand on my back and the approval in his voice were tools, not truth. We moved through the room like that, his hand guiding, my body following, both of us performing a dance we'd practiced but never named. He introduced me to bankers and lawyers and women who looked at me like I was a curiosity they couldn't quite categorize. I smiled. I deflected. I stayed within arm's reach and made him look unshakable. And then Marco Valenti walked in. I felt Adrian tense before I saw the man. A subtle shift in his posture, the way his hand flattened against my spine. I followed his gaze and found a man in his 30s, dark-haired and handsome in the way that spoiled fruit was handsome, appealing until you got close enough to notice the rot. That's Marco, Adrian said, his voice gone flat and cold. If he approaches, you find Aunt Rosa. She's the woman in burgundy by the bar. Go to her and stay there until I come for you. Understood? Understood. But Marco was already moving toward us, his smile wide and empty. a champagne flute in each hand. "Cousin," he called out, too loud, drawing attention. "You didn't tell me you were bringing a date." "She's not a date," Adrian said, his voice a blade wrapped in silk. "She's an associate." "Right, associate." Marco's gaze dragged over me, slow and invasive, and I felt Adrian's hand tighten against my back. "Funny, I don't remember approving any new hires." "That's because you don't have approval authority," Adrian said. "Or did you forget how the board vote went last quarter?" Marco's smile curdled. He stepped closer, invading space, and I could smell the whiskey under the expensive cologne. "Careful, Adrian. Secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst times, especially when they involve—" His gaze flicked to me. "Unchecked liabilities." "Lena," Adrian said quietly, not looking at me, "go find Aunt Rosa." "But—" "Now," he said, and the command in his voice left no room for argument. I went. Not because I was obedient, but because I could feel the violence coiled in Adrian's stillness, and I didn't want to be the reason it sprang loose. I found the woman in burgundy, Aunt Rosa, sharp-eyed and regal, watching the room like a general surveying a battlefield. "You must be Lena," she said as I approached. Her voice was warm but assessing. "Adrian said you'd be here, also said Marco might make trouble." "He's making it now," I said, glancing back toward the two men. They were speaking in low, tense voices, too quiet for anyone else to hear but loud enough to draw stares. Rosa sighed. "Marco's been making trouble since he could walk. Ignore him. Better yet." She handed me her champagne flute. "Hold this. Look occupied. And if anyone asks, you're with me." I took the glass, grateful for the anchor, and watched as Adrian said something final and cutting. Marco's face went red, then pale, and he stalked off toward the exit, leaving Adrian standing alone in the center of the room. For a moment, Adrian just stood there, hands loose at his sides, expression unreadable. Then he scanned the room, found me with Rosa, and some of the tension bled out of his shoulders. He crossed to us, slow and controlled, and when he reached me, he didn't touch, just stood close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the barely leashed fury radiating off his skin. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," I said. "Are you?" "No." He took the champagne from my hand and set it on a passing tray. "But I will be." He glanced at Rosa. "Thank you for keeping her safe." "She doesn't need keeping," Rosa said, her gaze shrewd. "She did just fine on her own." Adrian's mouth twitched. Almost a smile, not quite. "Yes," he said quietly, looking at me. "She did." The night limped forward after Marco's exit, but the damage was done. I could feel it in the way conversations shifted when we passed, the way eyes followed us with new curiosity, new calculation. Adrian felt it too. His hand stayed at my back, steady and protective, but his jaw was tight and his gaze never stopped scanning the room. By the time we made it to the private dining area, an alcove of dark wood and soft lighting where the mediation was supposed to happen, I was exhausted from holding the performance together. Adrian pulled out my chair himself, a gesture that drew approving nods from the older women at the table and sharp looks from the men. I sat and he took the seat beside me, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. "Last stretch," he murmured, leaning in like he was adjusting my napkin. 2 hours. You're doing beautifully." "I don't feel beautiful," I said. "I feel like a target." "Then we match." His hand found mine under the table, hidden from view, and squeezed once. 1 squeeze means you're okay. 2 means you need an exit. 3 means emergency, I finished. "I remember." "Good." He released my hand, and I felt the absence like a chill. "Stay close. I'll handle the talking." But staying close turned out to be more complicated than either of us anticipated. The dinner was supposed to be a negotiation between 2 rival shipping firms, with Adrian serving as neutral arbiter. But halfway through the second course, the conversation derailed into thinly veiled accusations about territory disputes and contract breaches. Voices rose, silverware clattered, and then someone, a red-faced man in an ugly tie, turned to me. "What about you, Miss Moretti?" he said, his tone dripping false courtesy. "You're Adrian's consultant. Surely you have an opinion on ethical boundaries in business relationships." The table went quiet. Adrian's hand twitched toward me, then stilled. I set my fork down carefully, smiled. I think ethical boundaries are like any other boundary, Mr. Carlson. They only work if both parties agree to honor them. And if one party doesn't, then the other party reassesses the relationship, I said smoothly, and decides whether the cost of staying is worth more than the cost of leaving. Carlson's eyes narrowed. Interesting. I heard you came to this relationship under rather binding terms yourself. The air crystallized. Adrian's entire body went rigid, but before he could speak, I leaned forward, my smile sharpening. You heard wrong, I said. I came to this relationship because I saw an opportunity to learn from someone who actually keeps his word. If you're struggling to find parallels in your own dealings, Mr. Carlson, I'd suggest the problem isn't the boundaries. It's the company you keep. Someone gasped. Someone else choked on their wine. And Carlson's face went the color of bad meat. How dare you, gentlemen, Adrian cut in, his voice cold and absolute. Miss Moretti has made an excellent point. Ethical boundaries require mutual respect. Since that appears to be in short supply tonight, I suggest we table this discussion and reconvene when cooler heads prevail. He stood, offering me his hand. Lena. I took it and stood, and we walked out of the dining alcove together, his hand firm and possessive at my back. The moment we cleared the doorway and turned into a narrow service hall, Adrian spun me into an alcove behind a marble column, his body blocking mine from view as a photographer swept past, camera flashing at someone else's scandal. Are you insane? He hissed. But his eyes were bright with something that looked like pride. You just eviscerated a man with ties to half the shipping routes on the eastern seaboard. He called me a liability, I shot back. What was I supposed to do, smile and take it? Yes, Adrian said. But there was no heat in it. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. Let me handle the fights, Lena. That's the arrangement. The arrangement, I said, my voice shaking now with adrenaline and fury and something else. Didn't account for me having a spine. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then snapped back to my eyes. I'm aware, he said roughly. Believe me, I'm very aware. We were too close. The column hid us from the room but not from each other, and I could feel the hammer of his pulse where his chest nearly touched mine. His hand was still at my back, fingers spread wide, anchoring me in place. Adrian, I whispered. Don't, he said, but he didn't move away. Don't say my name like that. Not here, not when I can't. A door opened somewhere behind us. Voices echoed. Adrian's hand tightened. And then he did something that stole the breath from my lungs. He reached for my hand, still hidden between us, and brought it to his chest. Palm to palm, one squeeze. Are you okay? I squeezed back. I'm okay. He exhaled, slow and shaking, and released me. Stepped back, ran a hand through his hair and turned away, giving me space to breathe, space to remember that this was a performance and we were still on stage. We're leaving, he said, his voice back to controlled and even. The car is downstairs. Walk with me. Smile if anyone stops us. And tomorrow? He looked back at me, and his eyes were storm-dark and unreadable. Tomorrow we talk about boundaries. I thought we just did, I said. His mouth curved, sharp and bleak. No, he said. We just proved we don't have any. We didn't speak in the elevator, didn't speak in the car. The city blurred past the windows, neon and glass, and the cold promise of rain, and I sat with my hands folded in my lap, the compass bracelet heavy on my wrist. Adrian sat across from me, one arm draped over the seat, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the glass. His jaw was tight, his breathing controlled, and I knew he was running the same calculations I was. How much of tonight was performance, and how much was something else, something dangerous and unnamed. When we pulled up to the townhouse, he didn't wait for the driver. He opened my door himself, offered his hand, and helped me out like I was something fragile. We climbed the steps in silence, and he unlocked the door with steady hands. Inside, the house was dark and waiting. He shrugged out of his jacket, draped it over the banister, and finally looked at me. You were extraordinary tonight, he said quietly. Reckless, infuriating, but extraordinary. You're angry, I said. I'm terrified, he corrected. Because you just painted a target on your back, and I don't know how to protect you from the consequences. Maybe I don't need protecting. Maybe, Adrian said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. I need to do it anyway. The air between us pulled tight. I should have stepped back. Should have thanked him for the evening and gone upstairs to my room and locked the door. Instead, I stayed rooted to the floor, my heart a drum, my breath shallow. Adrian, I said again, and this time he didn't tell me to stop. Go upstairs, Lena, he said, but his voice was gentle, almost pleading. Please, before I do something we'll both regret. I went. Not because he told me to, but because I could see the war in his eyes, control versus want, duty versus desire. And I knew that if I stayed, the war would end and we'd both lose something we couldn't get back. I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, and when I reached my door, I looked back. He was still standing in the entry hall, hands in his pockets, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I went inside, closed the door, and pressed my palm flat against the wood, the same way I always did. Across the hall, Adrian's door stayed closed, but his light burned long into the night. The week after the Riva Club felt like holding my breath underwater. Adrian was polite, professional. He still made coffee at dawn, still ran proximity drills, still corrected my posture with careful hands. But the ease between us had fractured into something sharper. A wire pulled too tight, humming with tension neither of us knew how to release. We didn't talk about the column, didn't talk about the way his hand had found mine or the way I'd felt his pulse hammering against my palm. We just moved through the days like actors running lines, waiting for the next performance, the next test, the next moment when the mask would slip. It happened on a Tuesday night, late, when the rest of the house was asleep and the rain drummed soft against the windows. I couldn't sleep. Too much adrenaline, too much thinking, too much of Adrian's voice in my head saying boundaries like it was a word that could save us. I went downstairs for water and found him in the kitchen again, same as that first night, sitting at the table with a mug of tea and a book he wasn't reading. Habit, he said when I appeared in the doorway, not looking up. I still don't sleep much. Me neither, I admitted, crossing to the sink. Too quiet. The house or your head? Both, he smiled, brief and tired, and closed the book. Join me, he said, if you want. I should have said no, should have taken my water and gone back upstairs. Instead, I sat across from him, the table between us like a demilitarized zone, and wrapped my hands around the coolness of the glass. For a while, we just sat in the comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Then Adrian said, I owe you an apology. I looked up. For what? For letting you walk into that dinner unprepared. His gaze was steady and serious. Carlson is a bastard, and I should have warned you he'd go for the throat. Instead, I threw you to the wolves and expected you to smile through it. I didn't smile through it, I pointed out. I eviscerated him. You did. His mouth twitched. It was magnificent, also reckless, also. He paused, choosing words carefully. Also exactly what I would have done. Is that a compliment or a criticism? Both, Adrian said. You're becoming dangerous, Lena. Not to others, to me. The confession hung between us, raw and honest. I set my glass down, suddenly too aware of the distance separating us, the way the light carved shadows under his jaw, the way his eyes tracked me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Dangerous how, I asked. Dangerous in the way that makes me forget why boundaries exist. He stood slow and deliberate and circled the table, not closing the distance entirely, just shifting the geometry so that he was closer, within reach if I wanted him to be. You were supposed to be temporary, a contractual obligation. 3 months and then gone. I still am, I said, but my voice was unsteady. I know. He braced his hands on the back of the chair across from me, the same chair he'd sat in when he taught me proximity management. But somewhere between the lobby and the Riva Club, you stopped being an obligation, and I don't know what to do with that. My heart kicked. Adrian, don't, he said, but he didn't move away. Don't make this easier. I need it to be hard. I need the boundaries to matter, because if they don't, he broke off, his jaw working. If they don't, I'll cross them. And I'll ruin everything we've built. What if I want you to cross them? The words came out before I could stop them, reckless and true. His gaze snapped to mine, heat flaring in the iron blue. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me, he moved. not toward me, but around the chair, eliminating the last barrier between us. When he stopped, he was close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the controlled intensity that he wore like armor. "If I cross that line," Adrian said, his voice low and rough, "I won't be able to uncross it. I'll want more and more, until there's nothing left of the distance that keeps you safe from me." "Maybe I don't want distance," I said. "Lena." My name was a warning and a plea. He lifted one hand, slow and careful, and braced it on the wall beside my head, caging me without touching me, close enough that I could count his breaths. Tell me to stop. I should have. Every ounce of self-preservation I had left was screaming at me to step back, to laugh it off, to rebuild the boundaries before they shattered completely. Instead, I looked up at him, at the want and the restraint warring in his expression, and said, "Don't move." He froze. His hand stayed on the wall, his body a line of tension and heat, and we stood there in the kitchen's soft light, close enough to kiss but not kissing, breathing the same air and holding the same unbearable moment. "This is a terrible idea," Adrian said, but he didn't move. "I know. You're under contract, under my roof, under my protection." His gaze dropped to my mouth, then dragged back up to my eyes. "If I kiss you, it changes everything." "I know," I said again. "But maybe everything needs to change." His breath hitched. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd close the distance, thought I'd finally know what it felt like to be kissed by a man who'd spent weeks teaching me how to stand close without touching. But then his phone buzzed on the table, sharp and intrusive, and the spell shattered. Adrian stepped back like I'd burned him, grabbed his phone, stared at the screen with an expression that cycled through annoyance, resignation, and something darker. 7 a.m. briefing, he said, his voice flat. "Elsa wants to discuss optics. She saw the photo from the Riva Club." "Photo?" I echoed. He turned the phone toward me. On the screen was a picture, grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough. Me at Adrian's shoulder, his hand at my back. Both of us looking at each other with expressions that were too open, too unguarded, too real. "Marco's doing," Adrian said. "He leaked it to the gossip sites. By morning, every tabloid in the city will be asking who you are and what you mean to me." "And what do I mean to you?" The question came out smaller than I wanted. Adrian looked at me for a long, unbearable moment. Then he pocketed his phone, picked up his mug, and headed for the door. "I don't know yet," he said quietly. "But I'm starting to think that's the most dangerous part." He left before I could answer. I stayed in the kitchen, alone with the cooling air and the ghost of his proximity, and pressed my palm flat against the table where his hand had been. Upstairs, neither of us slept. The morning briefing with Elsa was a masterclass in controlled demolition. She arrived at 8 sharp, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and a smile that could cut glass. She sat across from Adrian in his study, tablet in hand, and methodically dismantled my existence in his world with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 100 times before. "The photo is a problem," Elsa said, swiping through what looked like a dozen versions of the same image. "The narrative is already forming. Mystery woman. Valenti's new companion. Who is Lena Moretti, and why does she matter? We need to get ahead of it." "Then get ahead of it," Adrian said. He was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, gaze on the street below. "Issue a statement. Mrs. Moretti is a strategic consultant assisting with community outreach. Keep it boring." "Boring doesn't work when you're looking at her like that." Elsa tapped the screen, zooming in on our faces, on the unguarded moment the camera had caught. "This isn't professional interest, Adrian. This is personal. And personal is a liability we can't afford right now." "Noted," Adrian said flatly. "I'm serious." Elsa's voice sharpened. "Marco is already shopping the story to anyone who'll listen. He's spinning it as you being distracted, compromised. If the board thinks you're making decisions with your heart instead of your head—" "My decisions are sound," Adrian cut in. "They always have been." "Your decisions are sound when you're focused." Elsa stood, smoothing her skirt. "Right now, you're not. And that makes her—" She gestured vaguely in the direction of the rest of the house, where I was presumably still upstairs pretending I couldn't hear every word. "A problem that needs managing." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. "What are you suggesting?" Adrian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm suggesting you create distance, publicly and privately. Move her to neutral quarters, dial back the appearances. Make it clear she's a temporary fixture, not a permanent one. Elsa softened, just slightly. I know you're trying to do the right thing here, Adrian. But the right thing for her is to keep her out of the crossfire. And right now, standing next to you is the crossfire. Adrian didn't answer. He just stood there, staring out the window, his jaw tight and his hands clenched in his pockets. After a long moment, Elsa gathered her things and let herself out. The front door clicked shut. The house settled back into silence. I should have stayed upstairs, should have given him space to process, to decide, to do whatever calculus men like him did when choosing between what they wanted and what was safe. But I found myself descending the stairs anyway, drawn by the weight of the conversation still hanging in the air. Adrian was still by the window when I reached the study doorway. He didn't turn around. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," I said. "She's not wrong." "I know." His voice was flat, defeated. "That's the problem." I stepped into the room, closed the door behind me. "So what now? You ship me off to some neutral corner and pretend the last month didn't happen. If it keeps you safe, yes." He finally turned to look at me, and the exhaustion in his face made my chest ache. This is what I was trying to avoid, Lena. The moment when proximity becomes a weapon someone else can use against you. "I'm not afraid of weapons," I said. "You should be." He crossed to his desk, braced his hands on the edge. "Marco won't stop with gossip. He'll dig. He'll find the contract, the debt, the fact that you're here under duress, and he'll spin it into something ugly, that I coerced you, that you're trapped, that I'm no better than the men who came to collect you that first night." His voice cracked on the last word. "I won't let him do that to you." "So you'll do it first?" I heard the hurt in my voice and didn't hide it. "You'll send me away and make it look like I didn't matter?" "I'll send you away and make it look like I'm protecting you," Adrian corrected. "Because I am." The rain started then, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. Adrian looked at me across the study, and I saw the moment he made his decision. Saw the walls go up, the careful distance reassert itself. "I'll have Rosa arrange accommodations," he said quietly. "Somewhere comfortable, safe. You'll have access to the attorney, the retainer, everything promised in the contract, but you won't be here." "When?" I asked, my throat tight. "Tonight." He looked away. "It's better if it's fast, like pulling off a bandage." "A bandage," I repeated. "Is that what I am?" "No." The word came out fierce and raw. "You're the thing I can't afford to lose, which is why I have to let you go." He didn't ask for my help packing, didn't hover or supervise. He just disappeared into his study and stayed there while I went upstairs and gathered the few things I'd accumulated. Some clothes Rosa had quietly left folded on my bed, toiletries, the book I'd been pretending to read. The compass bracelet sat on my nightstand. I stared at it for a long moment, then left it there. "Camouflage," he'd said. "Not a gift." I was halfway through folding a sweater when I heard the knock, soft, hesitant, not Adrian's usual confident rap. I opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, soaked through, his white shirt plastered to his skin and his hair dripping onto the hardwood. "What?" I started, but he held up a hand. "I went out," he said, "to clear my head. Got caught in the rain." He looked down at himself, almost sheepish. "Forgot an umbrella." "You forgot," I stopped, stared at him. Adrian Valenti, who planned everything, who controlled every variable, who never got caught off guard, had forgotten an umbrella. "Come in before you flood the hallway." He stepped inside and I closed the door. For a moment we just stood there, him dripping and miserable, me trying not to notice the way the wet fabric clung to the lines of his chest and shoulders. "Stay here," I said. "I'll get a towel." When I came back from the bathroom, he was sitting on the edge of my bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I draped the towel over his shoulders and he looked up, surprised, like he'd expected me to throw it at him from a distance. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome." I sat beside him, not too close, but not far either. "Do you want to talk about it?" "About what?" "Whatever sent you walking in the rain without an umbrella." He exhaled, long and slow. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. I don't know how to be the man who keeps you safe and the man who... He stopped, jaw working. I'm good at control. I'm good at distance. I'm not good at wanting something I can't have. Who says you can't have it? I asked softly. Elsa, Marco, the board, common sense. He looked at me and his eyes were storm dark and lost. You should be the one saying it, Lena. You should be telling me to keep my distance, to honor the boundaries, to remember that you're here because of a contract, not a choice. Maybe I'm tired of shoulds, I said. His breath caught. Before he could answer, before I could second-guess the impulse, I reached for his hand and turned it over, palm up. There was a scrape along the base of his thumb, raw and red, the kind of thing you got from catching yourself on brick or iron. You're hurt, I said. It's nothing. It's not nothing. I stood, retrieved the first aid kit from the bathroom, and came back. Let me see. He let me. Let me clean the scrape with careful hands. Let me wrap a bandage around his thumb. Let me tend to him the way he'd been tending to me for weeks. And when I was done, when the bandage was secure and his hand was still cradled in mine, he said, "You don't have to do this. I know, I didn't let go, but I want to." Something shifted in his expression, the control loosening, the walls lowering, just for a moment. He reached up with his free hand, slow and deliberate, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. His fingers lingered near my temple, tracing a line down to my jaw, and I could see the war in his eyes. Want versus duty, desire versus protection. "Lena," he said, my name rough in his throat. "If I stay here, I'm going to kiss you. And if I kiss you..." "Everything changes," I finished. "I know, you said that already. And you're still not telling me to leave." "No," I agreed. "I'm not." His hand curved around the back of my neck, warm and sure, and he leaned in, close enough that I could feel his breath against my lips, close enough that closing the distance would take nothing but intention. My heart hammered. The rain pounded, and we stayed there, suspended in the unbearable space between wanting and having. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket, sharp, jarring, and the moment splintered. Adrian pulled back like he'd been struck, checked the screen. His face went carefully blank. "It's Rosa," he said. "The accommodations are ready." "Of course they are," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. He stood, the towel slipping from his shoulders. "I should go. Let you finish packing." "Adrian?" "Don't," he said, and this time the word was a plea. "Please, don't make me regret doing the right thing." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. I sat on the bed, staring at the bandage I'd wrapped around his thumb, and wondered whose heart I was trying to protect, his or mine. Rosa's driver came at 7. Adrian didn't walk me out, didn't say goodbye. I saw him once, through the study window as I loaded my bag into the car, standing at his desk. Hands braced on the surface, head bowed like a man in prayer or penance. The apartment Rosa had arranged was in a quiet building in Chelsea, small, furnished, anonymous. She'd thought of everything, groceries in the fridge, fresh towels, a note on the counter with her number, and a single line in her elegant script. "Call if you need anything," including a ride back. I set the note aside and looked around at the space that was supposed to be safe, supposed to be neutral, supposed to be better than the fourth-floor room with the sloped ceiling and the man across the hall who couldn't sleep. It felt like exile. I unpacked mechanically, hung my few clothes in the closet, set my phone on the nightstand. It buzzed almost immediately, a text from Adrian. Just 3 words. "You arrived safe?" I typed back, "Yes." The reply came seconds later, "Good." Nothing else. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that he'd just ripped us apart to save me from a danger I wasn't sure I believed in. Just good, like that settled something. Like distance could undo proximity, like I could unlearn the feel of his hand at my back, or the way his voice dropped when he said my name. I set the phone down and didn't pick it up again. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. I didn't hear from Adrian except for the occasional check-in text. "Are you all right? And do you need anything?" Which I answered with single words because I didn't trust myself to say more. Rosa called twice, her voice warm and concerned, asking if the apartment was suitable, if I needed company, if I wanted to talk. I said I was fine. I was lying. On the 4th day, Elsa sent an email. Formal, impersonal. A termination letter citing restructured priorities and mutual agreement to dissolve the consultancy arrangement. There was severance, generous, more than the contract stipulated, and a recommendation letter so glowing it could have been written about someone else. At the bottom, in smaller font, "This decision was made in your best interest." Mr. Valenti insisted on that. I read it 3 times, then closed my laptop and stared at the wall. He'd severed the contract. Not because the 3 months were up, we still had 6 weeks left, but because he was setting me free, protecting me the only way he knew how, by cutting me loose completely, cleanly, with enough money to start over and a letter that would open doors. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like grief. I didn't cry. I'd learned a long time ago that crying didn't solve problems, didn't change outcomes, didn't bring back things that were already gone. Instead, I paced the small apartment, trying to figure out what came next, what I was supposed to do with my life now that the shape of it had changed so completely in the span of a month. The knock on the door came at sunset. I wasn't expecting anyone. Rosa had a key, and Adrian wouldn't come, not after working so hard to establish distance. But when I looked through the peephole, there he was, standing in the hallway in a dark coat and exhaustion, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who'd walked a long way to arrive at a decision he still wasn't sure about. I opened the door. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I echoed. For a moment we just stood there, the threshold between us like a demilitarized zone. Then Adrian said, "May I come in?" I stepped aside. He entered, and I closed the door behind him. He didn't sit, didn't take off his coat, just stood in the center of the small living room, looking around at the space that was supposed to keep me safe from him. "I came to apologize," he said finally. "For what?" "For handling this poorly." He met my eyes, and the rawness there made my chest ache. "For making unilateral decisions about your life without asking what you wanted. For assuming I knew what was best when I clearly didn't." "Elsa sent the termination letter," I said. "I know, I told her to." He exhaled, slow and controlled. "I thought ending the contract would protect you, remove the leverage Marco could use, eliminate the appearance of coercion. I thought—" He stopped, jaw working. "I thought if I made it official, I could stop feeling like I'd trapped you." "You didn't trap me," I said. "Didn't I?" His voice was gentle, almost sad. "You came to my house under duress. You stayed because of a contract. Every choice you made was constrained by circumstances I created. And every choice I made after that first night was mine, I corrected. Staying, learning, standing beside you at the Riva Club. None of that was the contract, Adrian. That was me choosing you." He flinched like I'd hit him. "You shouldn't choose me, Lena. I'm not—" He broke off, turned away. "I'm not good at this. At caring without controlling. At wanting without taking. I don't know how to— Then learn," I said. "With me, if you want to." He turned back, and the hope in his face was almost painful to look at. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail," I said simply. "And we figure it out together." For a long moment he just looked at me, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The risk versus reward. The cost of trying versus the cost of walking away. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides, stopped just short of touching me, and said, "I need you to understand something. Okay. If we do this, if we try, I won't be able to keep the same boundaries. I won't be able to pretend proximity is just strategy." His voice dropped, rough and honest. "I'll want more, and I won't always be good at asking for it instead of taking it." "Then I'll remind you," I said. "That's what partners do." His breath caught on the word. Partners. Not intermediary, not associate, not contract terms. Partners. "I released you from the contract," Adrian said carefully, "so that anything you choose from here forward is exactly that. A choice. Not an obligation, not a debt. A choice." He held out his hand, palm up, the same way he'd done that first morning in the kitchen. "So I'm asking, do you want this? Do you want me? Even knowing I'm going to be difficult and controlling and probably make decisions you'll hate?" I looked at his hand, at him, at the future he was offering, messy and uncertain and nothing like the neat 3-month term we'd started with. I put my hand in his. "Yes," I said, "even knowing all of that." His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure. And he pulled me in, not for a kiss, not yet, but just to hold me, his forehead resting against mine, our breaths sinking in the quiet. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For choosing me anyway." We stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the fragile beginning of something real. And when he finally pulled back, his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in days. "Come back," he said, "to the townhouse. Not as an intermediary, not as part of a contract. Just come back, if you want to." "I want to," I said. "But on one condition." His mouth curved. "Name it." "No more unilateral decisions," I said. "If something affects both of us, we talk about it. Together. Before you go making grand gestures to protect me from dangers I might not even be afraid of." "Deal," Adrian said. And then, carefully, deliberately, he lifted my hand and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, brief and chaste and full of promise. "Let's go home." We took his car back to the townhouse, the city lights blurring past the windows. Adrian sat beside me this time, not across, not distant, his hand resting near mine on the seat between us. Not holding, not yet, but close enough to feel the heat, the potential, the choice. When we pulled up to the house, Rosa was waiting on the steps, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She looked at me, then at Adrian, then back at me. "About time," she said. "Both of you were miserable." "We're working on it," Adrian said. And there was something lighter in his voice, something that sounded almost like relief. Rosa stepped aside to let us pass. "Your room is exactly as you left it," she told me, "including the bracelet on the nightstand. You forgot it." "I didn't forget," I said quietly. "No," Rosa agreed, her eyes sharp and knowing. "I didn't think you did." The rumor reached me through Rosa 3 days after I moved back into the townhouse. We were having coffee in the kitchen, her ritual, she'd explained, for making sure I actually ate breakfast instead of surviving on adrenaline and Adrian's terrible tea. She set down her cup with a deliberate clink that made me look up. "Marco's talking," she said, without preamble. "To anyone who'll listen. The story is that Adrian coerced you into the arrangement, that you're here under duress, that the family is covering up something unsavory." Her eyes were sharp. "It's gaining traction. Elsa's fielding calls." My stomach dropped. "Does Adrian know?" "Of course he knows. He's been in his study since 5 a.m. trying to contain it." Rosa's expression softened. "He's convinced it's his fault, that protecting you made you a target." "That's not—" I stopped, set my own cup down. "Where's the rumor starting?" "Who's Marco talking to?" "Journalists mostly, but also board members, people with influence." She paused. "There's a woman, Ava Collins. She works in PR for one of the shipping firms we mediate with. Marco's been seen with her twice this week. Rosa's sources say she's the one amplifying the story." I leaned back, thinking. Ava Collins. I'd seen her at the Riva Club, blonde, polished, the kind of woman who smiled while taking notes on your weaknesses. She'd been at the table during the Carlson blow-up, watching with sharp interest when I'd defended Adrian's boundaries. "Does Adrian know about Ava?" I asked. "Probably, but he won't act on it." Rosa's mouth thinned. "He's too busy trying to shield you to fight back, which means the narrative will keep spreading until it destroys both of you." "Not if I stop it first," I said. Rosa's eyebrows lifted. "And how do you plan to do that?" "By doing what I do best." I stood, reached for my phone. "I'm a concierge, Rosa. I solve problems people don't want to handle themselves. And right now, Marco and Ava are a problem that needs solving." It took me 2 hours and 3 phone calls to confirm what I suspected. Ava Collins wasn't amplifying Marco's story out of loyalty or belief. She was doing it because Marco had promised her an exclusive when the scandal broke. A tell-all interview with a disgraced Valenti that would make her career. She was an opportunist, which meant she could be reasoned with. I found her contact information through the Riva Club's event coordinator, a woman I'd charmed during the dinner by helping her navigate a seating crisis. One professional courtesy deserved another. By noon, I had Ava's private number and an appointment to meet her at a cafe in Midtown. I didn't tell Adrian, didn't ask permission. This wasn't his fight to manage anymore, it was mine. Ava was already seated when I arrived, her laptop open, her expression pleasant and predatory. She stood when she saw me, extended a hand. "Miss Moretti," she said warmly, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I wasn't expecting to need to reach out," I said, taking the seat across from her. "But circumstances change." "They certainly do." Ava closed her laptop, folded her hands on the table. "I assume this is about the rumors." "It's about the truth," I corrected, "which you're helping Marco obscure for your own benefit." Her smile didn't waver. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a factual observation." I kept my voice level, professional. "Marco promised you an exclusive. You agreed to amplify his narrative. But what you didn't account for is that the narrative is provably false, and I have documentation to prove it." Ava's eyes narrowed. "What kind of documentation?" "The contract," I said. "The termination letter. Correspondence with Adrian's attorney outlining the terms, the voluntary dissolution, and the severance paid above the stipulated amount." I pulled a folder from my bag, copies Rosa had helped me secure from Adrian's files, and slid it across the table. Everything Marco is claiming, coercion, duress, exploitation, is contradicted by a paper trail that shows Adrian Valenti went out of his way to protect my interests. Ava opened the folder, scanned the pages. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. "This proves the contract was legitimate," she said slowly. "It doesn't prove the relationship wasn't coercive." "No," I agreed, "but I can." I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and set it on the table. "I'm going to give you a statement, on the record. You can use it however you want, but once it's out there, Marco's story falls apart. And so does your exclusive." "Why would you do that?" Ava asked. "Why expose yourself?" "Because Adrian Valenti is a good man who made a hard choice in an impossible situation. And because I'm tired of watching other people control the narrative of my life." I met her eyes. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to record my statement. You're going to verify it against the documentation. And then you're going to decide whether your career is worth more than your credibility." Ava studied me for a long moment. Then she reached for her own phone, opened a recording app, and nodded. "Go ahead," she said. I took a breath, steadied myself, and spoke. "My name is Lena Moretti. I entered into a consultancy arrangement with Adrian Valenti pursuant to a debt instrument signed by my family when I was a minor. At no point was I coerced, harmed, or exploited. Mr. Valenti provided me with legal counsel, fair compensation, and the option to terminate the arrangement at any time. When external pressures threatened my safety and reputation, he dissolved the contract early and provided severance above the agreed terms. Any suggestion that I was held against my will or subjected to duress is categorically false. I am making this statement voluntarily and without influence from Mr. Valenti or his representatives." I stopped. Ava stopped the recording. "That's a hell of a statement," she said quietly. "It's the truth," I said. "Now you have to decide what to do with it." Ava closed her phone, closed the folder, and leaned back in her chair. For a long moment she just looked at me, and I could see the journalist in her warring with the opportunist. "If I run this," she said finally, "Marco will come after me. He'll call it a cover-up, claim you were coached." "Then include the documentation," I said. "Let people draw their own conclusions. But at least they'll have facts instead of innuendo." Ava smiled, small, rueful, and surprisingly genuine. "You're good at this." "I'm a concierge," I said. "It's what I do." She gathered the folder, stood, extended her hand again. "I'll run it," she said. "Tomorrow morning, front page of the business section, with full documentation and your statement." I shook her hand. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Ava said. "This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Marco doesn't lose gracefully." "Neither do I," I said. I didn't go back to the townhouse immediately. Instead, I walked, through Midtown, across the park, letting the cold air and the rhythm of my steps settle the adrenaline still humming in my veins. By the time I reached the townhouse steps, the sun was setting and my hands were numb. Adrian opened the door before I could reach for my key. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, shadows under his eyes that spoke to too many hours spent trying to control the uncontrollable. He stared at me for a long moment. and I saw relief and frustration and something else I couldn't name flicker across his face. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Solving a problem," I said. His jaw tightened. "Lena." "I met with Ava Collins," I said, stepping past him into the entry hall. I gave her a statement, on the record. She's running it tomorrow with full documentation of the contract, the termination, everything. Marco's story is dead. Adrian went very still. "You did what?" "I handled it," I said, turning to face him. "The way I should have from the beginning. This was my fight, Adrian. My reputation, my life. You couldn't fix it by hiding me away or dissolving contracts, so I fixed it myself." "By exposing yourself to Marco's retaliation," Adrian said, his voice rising. "By putting yourself in the crosshairs without backup. Without—" He stopped, dragged a hand through his hair. "Do you have any idea what he could do to you now?" "Less than he could do before," I said calmly. "Because now the truth is out there, documented, verified. He can't twist it anymore." "Lena, no." I stepped closer, held his gaze. "You don't get to be angry that I solved the problem you couldn't. You don't get to protect me from consequences I'm willing to face. I'm not your responsibility, Adrian. I'm your partner. And partners fight their own battles." The fight went out of him all at once. He exhaled, long and shaking, and leaned back against the banister. "I was trying to keep you safe," he said quietly. "I know," I said, "but I don't need safe. I need equal." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're extraordinary," he said, his voice rough and terrifying, "and I don't deserve you." "Probably not," I agreed. "But you're stuck with me anyway." His mouth curved, small, genuine, the first real smile I'd seen from him in days. "I can live with that." The article ran the next morning. I woke to a text from Rosa. "It's done. Well done." I went downstairs to find Adrian in the kitchen. The newspaper spread across the table, my statement printed in black and white under Ava's byline. He looked up when I entered, and I couldn't read his expression. "You made the front page," he said. "So did you," I pointed out, nodding at the headline, "Valenti air cleared of coercion claims, contract details revealed." "Because of you." He stood, crossed to me, stopped just short of touching. "You did in one afternoon what Elsa and I couldn't do in a week. You didn't just clear my name, Lena. You took control of the entire narrative." "It was the truth," I said. "The truth doesn't need spin." "No," Adrian agreed. "But it takes courage to tell it, especially when it costs you privacy, when it opens you up to scrutiny." His gaze was steady and serious. "Thank you for fighting for me when I was too busy fighting for you." "You're welcome," I said, "but that's not why I did it." "I know." He reached into his pocket, pulled out something small in gold, the signet ring, the one he'd set on the chair between us that first night in the lobby, the one that had opened this entire chapter. "I need to show you something," he said. "Will you come with me?" I nodded, and he led me through the house, not upstairs, but down, into the formal parts of the townhouse I'd never seen. Past the study, past the dining room, to a heavy oak door at the end of a narrow hall. He unlocked it with an old-fashioned key and gestured me inside. The room was small, windowless, lined with dark wood and filled with the scent of old paper. A family archive, I realized. Records and documents, ledgers and contracts, the kind of history that wealthy families kept locked away. Adrian crossed to a glass-fronted cabinet, unlocked it, and withdrew a single sheet of yellowed paper. He laid it on the table between us. "This," he said quietly, "is the original contract, the one your father signed, the one that brought you to my door." I looked down at it, the signatures, the terms, the language that had bound me to a debt I didn't create. My father's handwriting, shaky and desperate. And beside it, another signature, Adrian's father. "I've been holding on to this," Adrian said, "keeping it as leverage, as insurance, proof that the arrangement was legitimate, that I followed the terms." He paused. "But keeping it also meant keeping power over you, and I don't want that anymore." He picked up the paper, held it between us, and then, deliberately, carefully, he tore it in half. The sound was soft, final. He tore it again and again, until the contract was nothing but scraps on the table. There, Adrian said. No more debt, no more contract, no more leverage. He set the signet ring on the table beside the torn paper. This ring, this name, doesn't own you. It never did. But I wanted you to see me destroy the last piece of paper that said otherwise. My throat tightened. Adrian, I'm not done. He came around the table, stopped in front of me. I owe you an apology. A real one. Not for enforcing the contract. That was the situation we were handed. But for making decisions about your life without asking you. For assuming I knew what was best. For trying to protect you by controlling you. His voice dropped, rough and honest. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to default to control because it's what I know. But I'm asking you to call me on it. Every time. Because I don't want to be the man who cages you. I want to be the man who stands beside you. You already are, I said. Not always. He reached up, slow and careful, and cupped my face in his hands. But I'm trying, and I will keep trying. For as long as you'll let me. I covered his hands with mine. What if I want you to try forever? His breath caught. Forever is a long time. Good, I said. I've got nowhere else to be. He smiled, real and unguarded and full of something that looked like hope. Then he leaned in, rested his forehead against mine, and just breathed. Thank you, he whispered, for choosing me, for fighting for me, for not giving up when I was too afraid to hold on. Not red. He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for weeks. You're welcome, I said. Now stop apologizing and kiss me already. He laughed, soft and surprised, and pulled back just enough to look at me. Here, he asked, echoing the question he'd asked a dozen times before. Now? Here, I said. Now, if you want to. I've wanted to since the moment you stepped into my lobby and refused to be afraid, Adrian said. I've just been waiting for you to be ready. I'm ready, I said. Then yes, he said simply. And he kissed me. The kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. There was no urgency, no desperation, no explosion of pent-up tension. Instead, it was slow, deliberate, careful, like Adrian was memorizing the shape of my mouth, the taste of my breath, the way I sighed when his hand slid into my hair. It was a kiss that knew it had time, that didn't need to rush because we weren't running anymore, weren't hiding, weren't pretending that distance could protect us from what we'd already become. When we finally broke apart, Adrian kept his forehead pressed to mine, his breath unsteady, his hands trembling slightly where they cradled my face. Okay, he asked, voice rough. More than okay, I said, and kissed him again, shorter this time, sweeter. A punctuation mark on the moment. He smiled against my mouth. Good. Because I plan to do that a lot more often. I'm counting on it, I said. We stood like that for a while, wrapped in each other and the quiet certainty that we'd found something worth fighting for. Then Adrian took my hand, palm to palm, the way he'd taught me weeks ago, and led me out of the archive, back through the house, up the stairs to the 4th floor. He stopped outside my door. Our doors. The 2 rooms that faced each other across the worn Persian runner. The space that had held us separate and safe and too far apart. I know you just moved back in, Adrian said, still holding my hand. And I know we're figuring this out as we go, but... He paused, choosing words. If you ever want to stop sleeping across the hall, you're welcome in my room. No pressure, no expectations, just the option. If you want it. I looked at him, at this careful, controlled man who was learning to ask instead of command, to offer instead of take. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Good. He lifted my hand, pressed a kiss to my knuckles. Sleep well, Lena. You too, Adrian. He crossed to his door, paused with his hand on the knob. For what it's worth, he said, glancing back. I sleep better, knowing you're close. So do I admitted. His smile was soft and private and full of promise. Then he went into his room, and I went into mine. And for the first time since I'd arrived at this house, I fell asleep without pressing my palm to the door. Epilogue. Image. 3 weeks later. The balcony off Adrian's study had become my favorite place in the house. It was narrow, just wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table, overlooking the street below and the tangle of gardens behind the neighboring brownstones. We'd taken to having coffee there in the mornings when the weather allowed. Him with his terrible tea, me with the good coffee Rosa made, both of us watching the city wake up. This morning, I'd woken in his bed, a slow migration that had happened naturally over the past week, one night at a time, until sleeping apart felt stranger than sleeping together. He'd made breakfast while I showered, and now we sat side by side, my feet tucked under his thigh, his hand absently tracing patterns on my ankle. "Elsa called," Adrian said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The board wants to meet you, officially." I looked over at him. "As what?" "As my partner," he said simply. "In every sense that matters." "And what do I tell them when they ask how we met?" "The truth," Adrian said. "That you were brought into my life by a contract I didn't write and couldn't refuse. And that somewhere between obligation and choice, I fell in love with you." My breath caught. We hadn't said those words yet, had been circling them, approaching them carefully, like they were too big and too fragile to speak aloud. But Adrian said them now, easy and certain, like they'd been true all along, and he was just now getting around to mentioning it. "You love me," I said. "I do," he confirmed, meeting my eyes. Terribly, inconveniently, without reservation. He set his mug down, shifted to face me fully. "And if that's too much too soon, I'll wait. I'm good at waiting." "You're terrible at waiting," I corrected. "But lucky for you, you don't have to." I took his hand, laced our fingers together. "I love you too. Even when you're controlling and impossible and trying to protect me from things I can handle myself." "Especially then?" Adrian asked, smiling. "Especially then," I agreed. He pulled me closer, into his lap, into his arms, into the kind of kiss that tasted like coffee and promise, and the future we were building one careful choice at a time. When we broke apart, he reached for something on the table, the compass bracelet, the one I'd left behind and later reclaimed. "I want you to keep this," he said, fastening it around my wrist. "Not as camouflage, not as strategy, just as a reminder that you always have a choice, to stay, to go, to build something with me or walk away if it stops working." "I'm not walking away," I said. "I know," Adrian said. "But I need you to know you could, that I'd survive it, that loving you doesn't mean owning you." I kissed him again, soft and sure. "Good. Because I'm not interested in being owned, but I'm very interested in being loved." "Then we're agreed," he said, and pulled me back against his chest, his arms wrapped around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. On the table beside us, the signet ring sat next to a loose red thread I'd found in his coat pocket and reclaimed. 2 symbols, side by side. One for legacy, one for choice. One for what we'd inherited, one for what we'd built. We sat like that until the coffee went cold, and the city noise rose to a pleasant hum, and neither of us moved because we finally had what we'd been circling since that first midnight meeting in the lobby. Time, trust, each other, and the choice to stay.